Okay, today we're going to talk about doing some grief work. When we were at Legacy 3, we did some rage work. Almost everybody was there, except for Allie, I think, and who else wasn't there? Mostly Allie, I guess. So we're going to do grief work today. When we were doing rage at Legacy 3, what we got to see, I think what many of us got to see, was how powerful it was to allow that energy to flow through our bodies and to experience that and to let that out. And I think some of you probably had an experience that I've had, which is when you let that stuff out, it actually feels good. It's empowering because it's trapped in there. And if you can detox some of that powerful rage emotion, you free yourself up. And so grief is like that too. Grief is actually underneath rage. Rage is a surface cover for what's underneath, which is the grief. And grief is a gateway emotion. And to the extent, excuse me one second. To the extent that we can allow ourselves to release that emotion of grief, we can actually empower ourselves to open up our self-expression. And when you talk about places, like I've spent a lot of my adult life working on my voice and opening up my voice and being able to express it. And I've talked about how I got a lid on my voice and how I shut down my voice. That lid, the lid I've had on my voice as an adult, is grief. And so to the degree that I'm willing to do grief work and let the grief out and let it bubble up, I'm actually taking the lid off of my self-expression. And I think we've all got ideas that some emotions are good and some are bad, right? Like being angry, ooh, that's bad. Being happy and pleasant, that's good. Being expressing grief and sadness, not so good. But being happy and joyful and seeming like everything's cool, that's okay. That's kind of the culture. But I'm going to invite you here today to consider that grief is just one of the emotions. It's neither good nor bad. It's not any more good or bad than being happy and joyful. And it is one of the emotions, and it is something that keeps me stuck, keeps my self-expression stuck. And I'm going to give you a chance to look for yourself to see if there's grief within your own body, and that if expressing that grief would allow you to free yourself up. There's a tribe in Africa called the Dagra, and they live in Burkina Faso in Western Africa. And they become fairly popular over the last couple of decades. One of the members of the tribe, his name is Malidoma Patrice Somé. He's written a bunch of talks, and he's written a bunch of books and done a lot of talks here in the United States. When he was 4 years old, Jesuit priests in West Africa actually kidnapped him and took him from his tribe and raised him as a kid. And he didn't even, by the time he was an adult, he couldn't even speak the language of his own people. The Jesuits were hoping to convert him to Christianity. And what happened is, as he became an adult, Malidoma Somé became a bridge between this African tribe and the West. And he's managed to come to the United States and share a lot of the rituals and a lot of the thinking, the practices of the tribe. The tribe of the Dagra tribe has a community ritual for grief. That's a normal part of life. Whereas here in the United States, we get to, if there's a funeral, we get to experience grief during the funeral and maybe for that day or two, but that's it. There's no grief outside of that. Or if you broke up with a lover, maybe you can go cry your eyes out for the weekend, but a couple of weeks later, nobody really wants to hear about it. It's like grief's just like supposed to be not seen and not heard, and so it's swept under the rug. But in the tribe of the Dagra in Western Africa, they actually have regular rituals. And how I became acquainted with this is I went to the Minnesota men's retreat a few weeks ago, and we got to do a grief ritual, and I was with 100+ men, and I got to see 100+ men go through this grief ritual, and I could see how powerful that was for a lot of the men there to start expressing the grief and to let it out, let it bubble out. And all of a sudden, men were freeing themselves up. They were this baggage they've been carrying around for decades, for their entire life. They were able to let it go. As an example of another ritual that the Dogra people have is they have a ritual for marital disputes. So if you're married and say it's a husband and a wife and you've gotten this big dispute, they'll actually have the couple work it out in a public ritual setting. So what happens is they'll make a big circle, they'll take a bunch of ash and define this large circle, and this becomes sacred space within which the couple will step and work out their emotional problems with each other. And so inside of the circle defined by ash, spirits are not allowed to enter and disrupt the process that the couple's going through. Members of the community are not allowed to step into the circle. But on the outside of the circle, members of the community are welcome to observe and watch the couple as they work out the dispute between them, as they dig into the emotion and begin expressing it with each other. And also kids are allowed to sit on the outside of the circle and watch. And they learn that, wow, expressing your emotions is good. It's a healthy way of emotions come up in relationships, and a way to fix and heal relationships is to express your emotions. And so as a kid, you learn this growing up, that there is a ritual way of dealing with it. So the couple's in this circle defined by ash, and they stand at a little bit of a distance to each other. They agree up front there's going to be no touching of each other, there's going to be no violence, and that this is a safe ritual container in which they can, each of them, synonymously, which means not anonymously, they're going to do it very much out in public. They're going to get the emotion out. They're going to express the emotion that they're feeling with each other, and they're going to talk it out, and members of the community will come and go and watch. And as the couple is getting this emotion out, eventually they're going to release it all and allow themselves to get back to a safe, clear, loving place in the relationship. And that's a ritualized, normal part of community life for the Dogra people. In our country, grieving is a lost art. We don't really know much about grieving. What's interesting is talk about the Dogra tribe and their rituals for grieving and their rituals for a marriage, resolving a marriage dispute. But each of us sitting in this room, our ancestors, our grandfathers, or our grandparents of our grandparents, all at one point came from tribes. They all left tribes where that was the norm, was for there to be rituals for everything, that life was ritualized. And we've, in our modern era, especially here in the United States and Western Europe, we've divorced ourselves. We've lost the ability to grieve as a public, normal display of normal emotion. When I was at the Minnesota Men's Conference, I met a psychotherapist named Francis Weller, and he lives in the northern San Francisco Bay Area. And he led this grief ritual based on the Dogra people. And like I said, there was 100+ men there. It was very powerful. We went through this grief ritual for a few hours, actually. And I was very impressed with the way he led it, and also the results that the men produced for themselves in the course of the ritual. Psychotherapist Francis Weller talks about grief as a threshold emotion. The expression of grief allows you to open up your life. You can't get to other emotions. You can't express yourself fully unless you first express grief. And he says what we have today is we've got this flatline culture that really, your ability to express joy, you can't express more joy than you're able to express grief. If you can only express this much grief, then you're only going to be able to express this much joy. If you can express this much grief, then you can express this much joy. So that's why he talks about grief as the gateway emotion. It's like growing up, I had a challenge speaking my voice, up my voice, and I've talked about it being clamped down. I've talked about my voice being shut down. And when I say my voice is shut down and clamped down, what I mean is I got grief stuffed down, but I haven't expressed that grief. And so what clamps my voice shut, what keeps me inarticulate, unable to express myself, is the amount of grief that I had not than as a boy. And the more that I express it now, the more it frees me up. In this country, we're allowed to express grief, dead, briefly for a couple days, express grief for a lost love relationship for a couple days, couple weeks maybe, but after 2 months, everybody's like, get over it already, right? Man, another place where there might be grief that in our culture we don't even consider is what about childhood? What about childhood trauma? Certainly in this legacy program, for instance, we all have a pretty clear idea that there's a lot of childhood trauma in our running the show today. Example from when I was 10 years old, I did some coaching work with Rebecca recently, and she had me do some writing. And in the midst of that writing, I remembered this incident. Actually, what happened is I've got a new girlfriend. It's a 3-month-year-old relationship. And I noticed in the relationship that there was some energy, some like dark energy coming up for me around a kitchen knife and the relationship. I was like, whoa, what's that? Because I've seen that before, not in the last marriage, but actually in the first marriage that came up. So I was wondering what that was about. And I recalled the story from when I was 10 years old. My mom and dad had gone out to dinner. They went out to dinner every once in a while, not that often, but it was date night. And I was 10 years old, and my job was to babysit the younger brothers and the younger sister. And we got the house to ourselves, just having a good time running around and screaming and watching TV. And my dad had just bought a new kitchen table. It's heavy wood that was popular in the 70s, dark heavy wood, and 6 new chairs in this dark heavy wood. And one of us, probably my youngest brother, knocked over the chair at the head of the table and actually cracked it in the back. And I remember at the time that that's the kind of thing my dad might pull out the belt for. Certainly I was scared of finding out about the cracked chair, but I didn't even know who broke it. Then the next thing I know is someone's knocking on the door, and I open the door, and it's this woman with red hair, and she's about 5'6" and has a reddish skin complexion. She goes, "Oh, I'm here to see your mom and dad." I said, "Well, they're not here." She says, "Okay, I'm going to sit down in that chair right there and wait for them." And so she went ahead and sat down in the broken chair at the head of the table and proceeded to wait for my parents. And I'm a 10-year-old kid, so I didn't really think much about it. And we just resumed playing and hanging out and watching TV or whatever it was we were doing. And this woman's sitting in the kitchen chair for an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it was. And by then, the younger kids, some of us were falling asleep. I don't remember what happened when my parents came home, but I didn't hear any of the conversation. Probably we were just sent to bed, and that was the end of it. But the next day, I remember my dad saying, "Hey, why'd you let that lady into the house?" That's all he said about it. I said, "Well, I didn't. I did. I shrugged my shoulders. So I didn't let her in. She let herself in. I never got asked permission." But then also what happened the next day is when my dad was at work, my mom came and confided in me. I was her confidant. And as the oldest son, she would often use me as her confidant when something weird or strange would happen. And she told me that woman was a girlfriend of my dad. She came over because she wanted my dad to leave her and to go live with her. And so she came over to have that talk. To say to me exactly what the conversation was, because I never heard any of it other than what my mom said. But my mom was kind of shaken up and in a tizzy and a little upset, but she had a plan. So then my mom told me the plan. She said, "If that woman ever comes here again, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to say, Teddy, go untie the dog." And that was my signal, right? "Teddy, go untie the dog." I'd say, "Yes, Mom." And then I would come to the kitchen. I was going to grab the big kitchen knife. And then my job was to go outside to the woman's car, stab the tire with a knife, and then my mom was going to call the police. That was my mom's plan. Was that a good plan? I don't know. I'll leave that to your judgment. But that was the plan. Fortunately, I never had to carry out the plan. I can imagine if I would have had to carry it out, but I didn't. But still, as a 10-year-old kid, I was like, am I even going to be able to stick this knife in the tire? Am I man enough? I don't even know if I could do it. Am I going to cut myself? And what's going to happen? And so I can still feel the fear, a little bit of the fear of it. Like, I don't know if I'm man enough to stick this knife in the tire. So I'm bringing this story up to you because it's one of these childhood things. It's kind of an interesting story, right? But it's not, the point is for you not to get interested in my story. I'm just bringing this up as an example for you to start considering, well, what are some of your stories? I'm in a new relationship right now. I've been dating this woman 3 months, and I'm standing in the doorway of the kitchen, and all of a sudden I'm having thoughts about having a kitchen knife in my hand against this woman. And I'm telling you, I know it originates in this story. There's still some trauma, some energy in my body. So you might think that, yeah, I probably want to get this out of my body. And so what that is, there's some grief there. There's some, like, I don't know, why am I getting involved in this? And why am I my mom's confidant? So it might be useful for me to start feeling the grief of that. It might be useful to feel like, God, I don't know if I can pick up the knife. I don't know if I even have what it takes. It might be useful for me to start diving into that. And so I tell you this story, not so you get all wrapped up in my story, but just so you can see, I mean, if I did this, if I have any luck at all, you might have seen even a little bit of emotion there. And so if I'm going to do anything with my grief ritual, I'm going to let some of that grief come out. So I'm going to give you an opportunity in a minute to tell me a couple of your stories. And we really don't have much time at all. We've got like 10 or 15 minutes, and then Heather's going to be like, forget it. We got to go on with everything else. So this is your chance. So we're going to do some grief work here. I'm telling you, this is hugely powerful. I don't need to sell you on it. You just spent the last 7 months learning why something like this will be valuable. So let's just do this really quickly. Some of you will jump in and take advantage of this. Some of you won't, but it's your call. So let's all get into a circle right now. Let's all form a perfect circle right here. Perfect. That's a nice circle. Now what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to turn our backs to each other. And so what this is going to give us two things. One is, this is the safest room you're going to be in this year. You know these people for 7 months. You shared your heart. You shared your guts out with these people. These people have shared your guts out with you. This is, everybody here loves you. This is the safest space you're going to ever be in. And then number two, let's turn around. Let's turn our backs to each other now, but maintain the circle. And so now you're in the safest room with the safest place you're ever going to be. And you also have some degree of anonymity. It's like we're not really looking at each other. No one's going to hang on to your story. Your story is not really important to anybody but yourself. But this is a safe container and a safe space for you to tell your story. And what are some of the things? What are some of the unexpressed grief? What's an experience from your childhood or more recently maybe? Where in your life do you have unexpressed grief, or do you have an event that's still in your body for which the expression of grief might be useful? And like I said, we got 10 minutes here. There's not much time. We're going to do this popcorn style. Somebody go, tell me a story from your childhood where you know there's some energy still in your body, like what I just described.